Dial Models Workshop. You are entering Models Workshop After Hours, a modeling podcast where we talk about miniatures, model painting, and we cuss a lot. If you can be offended, we're probably going to offend you. Then you're going to laugh, and you're going to feel bad. And then we'll offend you again, and then you'll laugh again. You see the pattern. So kick back, sit back, grab your brush, grab your paints, and get ready to have some fun. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Models Workshop After Hours. This time we're not online and we're not Skyping it, so both people that are on the podcast are actually in the studio. It's myself and Jay, like the same Jay from the last podcast, not Jason. He is nowhere near that cool, though I do kind of look like Kevin Smith in my own special way, and I don't shut up just like him. But we're going to be talking about some stuff. Jay is somewhat newer in the entire painting scene, so he's going to be bouncing questions off me, and I'm going to be answering the questions to the best of my knowledge. He thought I was full of shit, and then he came in my studio, and he's like, wow, you have a lot of paint. And I was like, you thought I lied about it? No. But anywho, welcome, Jay. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and great to be here tonight, and hopefully this is a successful podcast for us.
Yeah, and for most people, if you are on the Talks of the Tick, you can go to Noble Pursuit and follow him, and you can follow me at Models Workshop. We're actually live streaming this right now over on TikTok, so this is kind of something new. And yeah, so, you know, once I finally get enough followers, hint, hint, I'll probably start live streaming over there, and we'll start live over in other places like Twitch and everything else. So,
well, and Larry, we actually have a bit of a podcast celebrity in here. We have Angry Wargamer Jay.
Oh, that guy who said I couldn't come on his podcast because it was video games. Like, oh, you're only a model nerd. You have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to video games. It's not like I haven't been playing video games since like 85 or anything, Jay. Just saying. Not that I'm bitter or anything like that, Jay. See? Podcasting. Wireless microphone because, yeah. So I can actually move away from my desk, Jay.
We have the technology. We can do it better, faster, stronger.
So, but hey, Jay, welcome to the stream. Hopefully we'll have you on here soon enough, too. He actually doesn't live too far from us. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I did not.
No, he actually lives over just across the Illinois border on 70. So he's only like 2 hours and some change.
Very cool.
Yeah. So one of these days we might have to get together and have a pod orgy of sorts.
Okay. Janelle, welcome to the chat. We are actually broadcasting our podcast at this point in time. It'll be up for listen later. If you do have questions or anything, we're talking hobby painting and everything else. So please throw them into the chat. We'll be more than happy to answer them. And yeah, you can come back and listen to them again at the Models Workshop.
models-workshop.com/podcast. You can also find us on pretty much every major platform, Spotify, Google Play, all of the Stitch, Apple Store. Yeah, I'm media whore, so I'm everywhere. I've definitely got my media knee pads completely and absolutely broke in, and I am not afraid to put me everywhere. But yeah, you can find us. You just have to type in Models Workshop After Hours. We have 115 or 16 episodes, so you've got plenty of listening, lots of knowledge. Usually we have a lot more people, but we were just BSing sitting here in the studio, and we decided, hey, why don't we record? Actually, Jay was like, why are we not recording this? Because we're basically doing a podcast and not recording it, you dumbass. And it's like, you know what? You're right. So let's go ahead and, yeah. So here we are. And he decided, he's like, I want to live stream it. And I was like, do it, dude.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of, well, I'll lead the conversation with some questions. You go over it and realize at this point in time that I'm actually taking notes and even showing it on the TikTok that I am taking notes because this is my legitimate journey through learning how to airbrush everybody. I have never picked up an airbrush. I've picked up a paint gun, but that's about as close as I get. So in the near future, it is something that I want to invest in and want to get better at. From everything I can tell, Models Workshop is the poster child of Models Workshop. Or at least that's what we're going to call him back.
One of the co-founders, one of 4 co-founders. It was kind of my idea to put together and give us like an official identity. And crunchy, I'm rolling over a bag of paints. Yep, that's how much stuff is here. I'm rolling over a bag of paints. Yay! Oh, those are actual paints too. Those aren't poster. All right, so getting into airbrushing, it's daunting. And one of the most daunting things about getting in airbrushing is finding out what exactly you want to get, what you want to use it for, all the different equipment that you're going to need, because it is not as simple as buying a paintbrush, a bottle of paint, and just going and doing your army. There's a lot of different things that you have to know, you have to learn about, and you have to find. Now, if you're going to talk, if you ask me, what should I buy? I honestly recommend go and get a compressor that you feel comfortable with. If you can get a good deal on a Badger airbrush compressor, rock on. If you can't, go grab yourself a Masters TC20T over at Amazon. I had one of those for 10 years. It did start breaking down, but it still runs to this day. It just has a couple things that need to be replaced, like the on-off switch broke. And I ended up upgrading to another Masters compressor. The way I look at it is compressors are all going to be produced pretty much in the same place. They're all going to be produced in China, for lack of, or Taiwan, or one of those places. So there's nothing really special about the air compressors as long as they're just good air compressors. And some people honestly slap their names on it and start charging. Now, what I recommend as far as airbrushes go, I like Badger. You have a ton of different companies. You've got Iwata, Paasche, Badger, Harder and Steenbeck, Devil Biss, and the list goes on and on. There's tons of different airbrush companies you can go with, and they all have their perks. They all have their downsides. The perk about Badger is, 1, they have an amazing warranty. 2, I've seen multiples of their brushes that are 20 or 30 years old that Badger still will serve it. I've also seen the owner of Badger have someone send in their airbrushes that were caught in a fire, and he can rip them. Like, stuff was melted inside the airbrush, and he fixed them up. And I don't think he charged. Also, when it comes to airbrush companies, the 2 companies that is easiest to find parts for is Paasche and Badger. Now, I could go, Paasche is a great company, and they are. The Talon is a good airbrush. The VS line and VL line, they're okay airbrushes. Like, for what we want, if we're going to go for for what type of airbrush, for the type of airbrushes we use, I would recommend getting the Talon. But the company that is second easiest when it comes to gathering up airbrush supplies is Badger. Not only can you find them online everywhere, eBay, Amazon, Chicago Airbrush Company, their own website, and everything else, you can usually find them in a lot of hobby shops. Badger finds their ways into a lot of hobby shops, and they're just really easy, and their parts are very affordable. And so are Paasche. But the thing is with Badger, I can call tomorrow, get a hold of the owner of the company with an issue I have, and they will try to resolve. How many places do you see where the owner of a multi-million-dollar international company sits in their forums and answers their question? I won't call Ken a friend, but we are definitely an acquaintance. He knows who I am by name. I know who he is by name. We've done some work with each other. He's helped me out by giving me some stuff at a very affordable price so I could bring it to you all. And he's a guy with a very gruff exterior, but he has a heart of gold. And he also doesn't bullshit you. That's one thing I really respect. And he's irritated me. He's pissed me off a couple times, but he's very abrupt, and he's very he doesn't dice around the subject. He tells you yes, no, there's no maybe. Yes, this is how it is. No, that's stupid. That's bullshit. And I respect that. I totally respect that from him, because a lot of times people try to surround stuff like used car salesmen and try to dress things up really pretty when they're not. You know, don't try to make a lemon an apple. If you have a lemon, sell the damn lemon. If you have an apple, you sell the damn apple. And that's what Ken does. Now, other lines, you have Iwata, which is a Japanese-made company, which they're nice, and their parts are relatively easy to find. They're a little bit more expensive than your Paasche and your Badger, and they're a little bit harder to find, but they're good airbrushes. But with them being good airbrushes, the price does go up as well. Then you have a company like Harder and Steenbeck, which is a German-made company, and they have their entry level is higher than most. So their entry level, you're looking at about $200. And the problem is, and the bonus is they share needles and nozzles between all their airbrushes. So even with their $200 airbrush, you're buying the same needle that's in their $400 airbrush, which is like $18. And this is their Infinity. This is the top of the line airbrush they have, and the needles are $18, and the nozzles are, to buy a needle and nozzle set, it's like $60. So for the price of a needle and nozzle for an Infinity, you're paying for over half of a Patriot 105.
Now, question for you, Larry, because the other thing because if you hop into any hobbying forum or Facebook group or anything like that, the thing that you'll see a lot of going is, well, I found this $100 setup at Harbor Freight, or this $100 setup on Amazon that's got everything that I could possibly. Now, to somebody who maybe does not have the aspirations of a competition level painter, is that something worthwhile to them?
Okay, so the Harbor Freight, avoid those with an absolute. Those are absolute. You can, if it's $100, and okay, and I'm not saying Harbor Freight's bad. I have several things from Harbor, but you have to understand what your expectations are going to be low. And for something like an airbrush, where we're painting stuff that's an inch tall, we have to have a certain. There's a certain amount of preciseness that we have to have, and if we don't have it, then we effectively are wasting our money. Now, the ones that you find on Amazon, they're typically mastered. Most of the time, whenever you find something on Amazon that's $100, you're looking at a master's, and for that $100, $90 of it's going towards that air compressor. Like I said, Masters TC20T, that's what I own for 10 years. Masters 848, that's what I own right now. So whenever you're looking at those kits, the airbrush itself, I own 3 Masters airbrushes. They are $20 airbrushes, and they are at the very bottom rung of what I would even say is usable. Is it usable? Yes. Are you going to get a competition paint job out of it? No. Is it something that if you buy the starter kit, now if you had the starter kit for $100 and you had the air compressor by itself for $90, I would say spend the extra $10, get that cheap Masters airbrush. Why? You can screw around with it. You can mess with it. You can learn the basics of trigger pull, applying air, and all of that stuff. And you paid $10 for it. So if you happen to screw it up, throw it in the garbage. And it's also something that's really good where you can take this thing down to the bare bit. And the internals of most airbrushes are fundamentally the same. They might have an extra piece here, an extra piece there. The grip mechanism might be slightly different. The air valve might be slightly different. But for the most part, effectively they're the same. And by taking apart this $10 airbrush, if you happen to not get it back together properly, you're not out really anything. It's a learning experience. And for $10, it's a great learning experience. You don't want to do that with a $400 airbrush. You don't want to do it with a $100 airbrush, because all of a sudden you're sitting there going, Now, would it be something that I recommend that you stick with? Absolutely not. Use it for a little while. I tried using mine for over a year. I actually got really good with my Masters GT40, 42, Masters T40. I got really good with the damn thing. But I'll tell you what, when I got a real airbrush, I was hindering myself. They say that just because you buy a better airbrush isn't going to make you a better painter. But if you have already maxed out your potential with something that's lesser, if you buy a greater tool, you're going to unlock your greater potential. And I found out that I was hamstringing myself for over a year by using this really cheap airbrush. And I ended up picking up a couple nice airbrushes, and it's like, wow, it's a world of difference, the quality of the paint job and the fact it's a lot less fighting. Airbrushing itself it's a good portion of airbrushing is mastering airflow and trigger. One of the hardest parts about airbrushing, funny enough, is mixing airbrush paint. Mixing your paints properly. That is one of the hardest. And Also, prep work, masking properly, preparing the surface properly. Because I'll tell you what, if you have a small ding in the surface, whenever you airbrush it, it's going to show up. So you need to learn how to prepare properly. Airbrushing isn't just about pointing the airbrush at a model and going psst and having a amazingly painted army. But once you master the three main things to airbrushing, yeah, you can do some absolutely amazing things with airbrush. And the big misconception about airbrushing is that it's cheating, because that we are able to pull off certain effects such as fades or anything else a lot quicker with an airbrush compared to a person that's painting traditional. Now, on the same token, there's things that brush painters can do with a paintbrush that we can't with an airbrush, and it's not cheating. It's just another tool to put into your bag to make you a better overall painter, if that makes.
Well, and I think that's ultimate. I mean, I know that's why I am here to try and develop, do not have. So hopefully that's why the listeners are. So at this point, we've kind of gone through the basics of your two main pieces of equipment, your airbrush itself and the compressor. If you had to say, other than paint, because we're going to get into that in a moment, if you had to say that there were any other key tools that you would need, what would it be?
All right, so other tools that are really handy when it comes to airbrush is one, of course, hose, because you have to have the hose between the air compressor and the airbrush. Make sure you're buying the right size hose, because Iwata, Harder and Steenbeck, and a couple others like Devil Biss all use one standard, while Paasche has their own and Badger has their own. Technically, you can put a Badger hose on a airbrush on a Paasche and vice versa, though the thread count is one different. Second of all, one of the most important tools you can do is Teflon tape, plumber's tape. You don't want air leaks, and that's what's going to stop your air. And it's like $1, Walmart or Sears, or well, not Sears, they don't exist. Target or any of these other places, it's $1. You definitely want it, and if you screw up, take it off and put more on it. Simple as that. Do not use thread locker. Oh my God, do not use thread locker, especially red. Teflon tape, that's all you need. Next thing you want to do is you want to learn what your regulator is and how to use it. That should come on your compressor. If it doesn't, you're going to need to buy one and attach it to your compressor and your tank. Honestly, I have seen people do silly mistakes, like they're just spinning it, which does nothing. You have to lift it up and turn it for some models. Other models, you do just twist it. And one way you can make sure you're actually doing something is hold down the airbrush, have the compressor on, and adjust it. If the needle goes up, that means you're pushing more air. If it's going down, that means you're pushing less air. That means you're actually adjusting your regulator. Also, when you adjust your regulator, you want to do it with the airbrush flowing air, and that's just a little tip that I hopefully will remember to tell you again in the future. But you definitely want it to adjust it while air is flowing, because that's going to give you true PSI. So you could adjust it to 20 PSI without air flowing, but when you start airbrushing, you might be shooting 16. And that's not what you want, because it'll screw things up. But otherwise, you want a good cleaning kit. And it doesn't have to be expensive. There is one, I think Masters puts it out. There's it on Amazon. I think it's $25, and it has pretty much everything that you need in it. And that little squirt bottle that they use in the medical profession, the one that you can hold upright and you squeeze it and it squirts, that thing is a godsend. Also, isopropyl alcohol is amazing. The purer, the better. It's great for rinsing your airbrushes. Don't use it around an open flame because it's priced alcohol. Actually, I wouldn't even spray it. I would just rinse with it. It breaks stuff down. Of course, you have regular water. Keep water on hand to flush your airbrush out. Oh, other things for airbrushes. Q-tips. Q-tips are amazing to have around. Lint-free towels are amazing to have around. And just general airbrush cleaner. That is honestly... there's some that are really hardcore that gets gunk out. Those are cool. But the regular ones you buy in a little bottle that are clear and you shake them up and they get a little soapy, those are kind of junk. Honestly, just go find ammonia-free Windex and you can dilute it like 1-to-1 and shoot it through your airbrush, or shoot it pure. It's not going to hurt it. Just make sure it's ammonia-free because you don't want to gas yourself out. But in the long run, it's just better to run the Windex through it because it's cheaper. So... what other tools? Quick disconnects are super. That's an accessory and it's not needed, but if there was one accessory that I say you should really have to have, quick disconnects. Basically what they are is there's a sleeve that's a male and a female. You attach the male to the airbrush, and it's a quick coupler. And you push it in, and it snaps shut, and it seals it, and you're good to go. If you need to remove the airbrush, you just basically pull down on the collar. It pops right off. And that's good because then whenever you're done airbrushing, you could take it over to the sink and give your airbrush a really good rinse out, get all that paint out. Or if you're switching colors, you can do the same thing. And then... yeah, basically compressor, airbrush, hose, learn how to use the regulator, quick disconnects, a good cleaning kit, good cleaning accessories, and then the paints. I think that's generally, I'm sure I'll remember something. I'll be like, oh yes, by the way. But yeah, I think that's an overview of what to get. But actually, to go back to one thing, if you just want someone to tell you what to get, I would honestly say Badger Patriot 105. I think honestly it's the most user-friendly airbrush that has parts available that are not super expensive. This thing is a damn beast. This is the old school Dodge will run forever truck or Toyota truck that runs forever and will never break and will never die. That's what this airbrush is. While a lot of these other ones are like the Mustangs and the Corvettes and the Ferraris, they're great. They're fun, but the maintenance cost is really high. And so is learning. You know, it's not hop behind the wheel and go. It's more of a lot of trickery.
All right. And I can honestly say from just looking around the room, there is more paint, model paint specifically, in this room than I have ever seen in a room before. So my next big question, because this is probably as much, if not more of an investment than a being airbrush, what paint would you recommend for a new airbrush?
Holy macaroni. Oh boy. There are so many different paints because here's the thing. You can airbrush with normal model paint. You can take GW paint and airbrush with it. And I'm not talking their airbrush, even though that's nice. Basically what their airbrush line is, it's pre-mixed. It's thinned out for you. But if you learn how to mix your paint, and that's, like I mentioned earlier, one of the hardest parts is how to properly mix your paints, get them ready to go, and spray with them. And that takes a lot of dilution. It takes a lot of additives. It can. I mean, you can honestly just go with water. I personally like adding flow aid to mine, maybe a little bit of drying retarder to help with dry tip, which is a problem that airbrushers have. I promise it's not an STD. That would be drippy tip. But
so maybe we do this a little bit differently. Instead of maybe a one size fits all, maybe do a good beginner where maybe not so much mix needed, maybe more of an intermediate where no, you're going to have to mix it. You're going to have to kind of know what you're doing a little.
Okay, so and that's where it would stop because there wouldn't be an expert level paint unless you're talking about taking your own damn pigment and custom, and that's a whole bag of potatoes. That's different than it.
Well, that's Wappleism.
Would be Wappleism.
That'd be in the book of Wapple, isn't it?
One of the tomes of the things. Okay, so if you just want straight up ready to paint, ready to go, if you want specifically hobby paints, there are three that come to mind. You have Badger's miniature paints. They're paints that are designed for models, but they're built for airbrushes. Now, if you paint with Vallejo, as an example, you've got Vallejo Model Air, and those tend to match their regular line, so there's the bonus of that. Lastly, you've got GW's airbrush paint, which also matches their paint. There's some downsides to it. I don't like the fact that they put their airbrush paints in pots, so you definitely will need to pick up some pipettes. You switch stuff over or droppers, depending if you want to wash them in between. But any one of those three, you're pretty good with. If you want straight airbrush paint, you can go with Createx. They have a Wicked Color line and they have their normal line. Those are straight airbrush paints, so you really don't need to do a lot to them. You can pretty much drop them in and go, though you can thin them as well. One thing you have to watch out for, and this goes to the intermediate section. I'll bring it up in a second then. But those are pretty much the major paint lines. I personally use Createx, Wicked Colors, and I use Del Rami's F&W inks, which are artist inks, and I airbrush with those actually quite a bit because those things flow through an airbrush like butter. But that's a whole different thing. These are actually acrylic inks, not acrylic paints. If I was forced to pick an airbrush paint to use and utilize in my airbrush, I would honestly go with Vallejo Air. It's a little bit cheaper than GW, and also I'm of the old school, so I have a lot of the old school GW colors, and that would match what I do. Now, honestly, if you're a new school painter and you've been using the GW line, then honestly, just use the GW airbrush, with the exception of like black and white. Common colors like that, go buy Createx, because, yeah, 6-ounce bottle of white and black for like $4. Can't really go wrong with that. Now, for intermediate, when you start learning how to mix your paints and you're adding in the additives, at that point, use whatever the hell you want. You can use watercolors, you can use GW, you can use P3. One major warning that I have to give is you have to be careful about how much water you add, because the way acrylic paint works, water is the medium. Water is what keeps the paint from doing its chemical reaction and drying. And the evaporation of the water is what causes the pigment and the binder to bind together. Now, what'll happen is if you use too much water, it'll actually start deteriorating the binder, and the pigment and the binder will not bond properly, and the paint starts looking kind of funky. So at that point, you actually need an airbrush thinner, which makes it where the bond is still there. The binder doesn't break apart, and it's just better. The stuff that I use is made by Wicked Colors. It's Wicked Reducer, W500, and it's really good stuff. I really enjoy it. I mix it with GW paint. Anything acrylic, it's going to work with. That's something that a 20-ounce bottle of I'd almost recommend if you're going to be into airbrushing really heavy. Not super expensive. The big thing is let it cook for a little while. Like whenever you're mixing the paints, add however much paint, add the reducer, add a little bit of water, flow aid if you want it, mix it all together, and then let it sit there for a while. Because if you shoot it directly, the molecules of paint and the molecules of binder and the molecules of reducer are still separated from each other. What you want is everything to start blending together. It's like a minor chemical reaction. So you want to give it time to cook and bind together and come together and make it where it's actually truly reduced instead of just thinned out with reducer still floating off by itself. Usually mix it up and give it about 20-30 minutes, and it by that point it'll all be nice and ready to go and all that jazz.
All right, so and I'm basically just kind of working your bumpers right now, but so for me starting, I could definitely continue to go with my Citadel paint line that I've been using, because I've got a collection, and I'm sure a lot of the other hobbyists out there who are thinking about getting into airbrushing have the collection as well, and you can mix them out and everything else. But if I wanted to go with true airbrush paints, Vallejo Air is the way to go.
One thing you have to keep in mind is Vallejo, I wouldn't call them a true airbrush paint. They are designed for an airbrush, but Vallejo's not an airbrush paint company, like in the way Createx is. If you want that, and Createx would be if you want a pure airbrush company. But if you want a paint that's gamer-centric, that's designed for an airbrush, then yes, I would personally go with Vallejo. For you, honestly, I would recommend going with the GW branded airbrush paint, because at this point, that's what you have, that's what you've used. It'll color match, because they're designed to color match with the GW line, because Games Workshop, for those who don't know, has a proprietary color system. Now, this is kind of new. It happened, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. But in a nutshell, GW has had like 7 or 8 different versions of paint throughout the years, but most of them have had the same colors. They might have tweaked them here and there, but you always had blood red, you always had goblin green or goblin snot, chaos black, stuff like that. Those were mainstays, green blue. And what happened was Vallejo basically copied their entire paint line with their game colors line. And they changed the names up a little bit, but pretty much they were matching paints all the way across. So GW had to make the hard decision whether or not to piss off a small portion of their older crowd, which would have included me, and redesign all of their paints, changing them to be proprietary, meaning they're the only ones who make that color. So that's what they did, because most of their paint sales go to newer players. And business sense says if you lock a newer painter into a certain color that you only produce, guess what? They're going to come back to you and buy their paints from you. Whereas if they continued, it would be like what happened to me. I started with Citadel, and then I switched over to Game Colors. And that's also another reason I wasn't too upset. It's because, yeah, I can't get my Hawk Turquoise anymore, but I can go over to Vallejo and pick up a Falcon Turquoise, same color. And yeah, that is the actual name, the old school naming scheme of the two. One was Hawk, one was Falcon. Vallejo wasn't exactly subtle with their copying.
Or imaginative.
Yeah. But that's not the first time Vallejo's come under fire for something. But that's a topic for another podcast. And okay. So for you, I honestly highly recommend just going with the GW Airbrush Paint, because it's going to color match your army and everything is set up. GW's new paint line, while it is proprietary,
proprietary,
what he said, it is a more paint by number system. And this is not to dumb it down, but it really is. Can you be a high-end painter and use their paints? Absolutely. But they're very user-friendly, especially for like newer painters. They kind of have a do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. Hey, and also do this. And look, your models look better than the Golden Demon winners from 1992. I wish that was a joke. It's not.
Well, especially with the contrast line. It is literally, it's no longer even two thin coats, which I know for me personally that I've refused to buy contrast.
That's what I mean. You have your foundation paint, which is your main color. Then you have the overcoat, or the layer color, or whatever it is. Then you have the highlight. Then everything is basically, they should just number the damn bottles. 1, you use this first. 2, you use this second. 3, you use this third. It really is a paint by number system, and you basically just paint all your models in order of how they have the bottles set out, and you can get an amazing looking army, and that's good. That is absolutely good. There's more work out there than the commission painters that are out there can handle. So people painting their own stuff, 1, it's fun. 2, it invests them in their army. And 3, great. But if you can't, there's still, or if you want something that looks a little bit better than what your skill is, there's still commission painters out there. The paint by number system isn't bad. It's actually amazing. It means that a new painter can step in and do a pretty damn good tabletop quality paint job, even on their first get to go. I hate to say it, but I kind of like GW's new system. And, the reason I know it's winning, other paint companies are copying it. There's more than one system that has all of a sudden come out. And that goes for my favorite paint line, War Colors. They started mimicking some of the stuff that GW did. Why? Because it made sense. Do foundation paints make sense? Absolutely. Do highlight paints make sense? Absolutely. Do washes make sense? Absolutely. Do technical specialist paints make sense? Once again, absolutely. And this is something GW went through and designed something that, once again, everyone is starting to mimic. People will complain, people will bitch and everything else, but everyone mimics it. And that right there is a pure sign of something that's good. I mean, hell, when GW changed their entire product line and Vallejo kind of fell off because they're hard as hell to find nowadays, army painters stepped up and started producing basically like the mud and the black that GW used to produce. And not only did they do that, but they started picking up some of the colors they used to do too. And they started picking up where Vallejo kind of fell off with producing their paints in the dropper style with the carrying cases and everything else. And it used to be where you could find Vallejo, you could find Reaper, you could find P3, and now it's coming down to it where if you go to a gaming store, you're going to find Citadel, which locks you into painting the Citadel if you want your army to match, or you can pick up Army Painter. And unless you're willing to order online for like War Colors or some of these other lines, then that's pretty much it. And I completely went on a tangent about this shit. But yeah, to bring it back, intermediary Yeah.
Intermediary.
Whatever. It's getting late. Next, any questions from the peanut gallery?
Goblin Alchemist actually hopped in. We were actually talking about you a little earlier today.
Oh,
Angry Wargame J hopped in for just a brief moment. I don't think he's still with us, but the connection's kind of been hopping in and out a little bit, so I apologize about that, guys. It is a problem that I know Larry's been working on, so bear with it a little bit. But for the most part, I think that about any final points to add on how to start with airbrushing?
I think honestly I think I pretty much covered the entire what to do when you get into airbrushing. Find an airbrush. If you don't want to do the research, Patriot 105. Find a decent compressor that people recommend. Once again, I recommend TC20T. It's inexpensive and pretty decent quality. Mine lasted 10 years. If not, you can go with something that's branded. At that point, it's kind of like a warranty. If you want to definitely utilize a warranty, go with something from Iwata, go with something from Paasche, go with something from Badger. It'll cost you a little bit extra, but maybe that peace of mind is worth it. If you want something, there's a dozen different airbrushes that I can go over. But honestly, I think at the end of the day, I do 90% of my airbrushing with a Patriot 105, and I own like 9 airbrushes, including 2 Infinity. I also have a Sotar, I have a double disc dagger. I have all these, but I still go back to my Patriot 105 for most of my work because I can do 90% of my work with those. And if something happens to that particular airbrush, it's $6 to fix. And then I pull out the expensive boys to finish it up and then switch over to brush. And so, if you're just looking for your basics, Patriot 105. It's one of the cheaper brushes that Badger makes. I could get into the anatomy of an airbrush, but honestly, you want dual action siphon feed. You don't want to, or not siphon, gravity feed. Ignore the siphon part. You don't want a siphon feed. The only time you'd want a siphon feed is if you specifically want a siphon feed. I have one siphon feed, and I bought it for a very specific reason, and that is to spray a lot of paint in a short amount of time. And that's the only reason. And you definitely don't want a single action airbrush. They suck for our hobby. You want a dual action gravity feed. Period. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And to know what they are, you push down and you pull back for paint. That's the dual action. Down and back. 1, 2. And then gravity feed means it has the cup on top of the airbrush, or that's where you put the paint is on the top. Siphon feeds, they feed from the bottom, and you can usually have bigger containers, like a 2 or 3 ounce. If you ever see like t-shirt airbrush artists, they tend to use siphon feeds for that reason, because they spray a lot of paint. Siphon feeds have to run at a higher PSI, which means you don't get as much detail. Whereas gravity feeds, since gravity pulls the paint into the chamber instead of being sucked in like a straw, you can utilize a lower PSI, which means you can get more precise detail. Like I said, I have one siphon feed, and as for painting really, really big stuff, like if I'm bulk painting a whole bunch of vehicles or a very large vehicle, I'll pull out the siphon feed. But otherwise, it's gravity feed all the way.
I think that covers everything I've got. Doesn't look like we've got any other questions in the chat. So I'm ready to call this a successful episode and successful live. Guys, hit us up.
Literally the shortest episode in our history.
Hey, we got a lot of content in really fast, though. A lot of content in really fast. I took notes. This is definitely something I'm looking into, so yeah, if you guys want to follow along with me, I think at this point in time, Larry's going to let me hang around and become more of a regular on the show. Or you can find me on TikTok at Noble Pursuits, Facebook at facebook.com/IN Noble Pursuits, N Noble Pursuits.
And it's one of those things. I've been airbrushing miniatures for over 20 years. 18 years now, and you only get better the more you work at it. And like right now I'm rusty as all hell. Finally got everything set up, had the air compressor right down there, and I still need to run some stuff, but it's kind of like riding a bicycle. It's definitely not like rollerblading. It's more like riding a bicycle. Once you learn how to do it, you learn how to do it. Inside joke, if you've been around long enough to where I decided to pick up rollerblading again at 40 and ended up trying to unscrew my ankle, that's where that joke comes from. But Yeah, it's a journey, and just track along with Jay because he's an absolute noob when it comes to this, and he likes to talk to the tick, to the tick, to the talk. So he will be streaming up his deal, and you can find me on TikTok at Models Workshop. No spaces, no dashes, just one word. And I take requests. If you have a question about paints, about magnets, about brushes, about airbrushes, about which EverQuest character is the hottest, you can message me, and I have no problem messaging back, or more than likely just doing a quick, hey, here's your question, this is my answer. Hey, I gotta get people to follow me too, damn it. You can also find us at Facebook, and it's facebook.com/The Models Workshop. And we also have a website, models-workshop.com. To find the podcast portion of it, put a / and podcast. Once again, you can find us at Models Workshop After Hours on literally everything that has podcasts. If we're not on a service, let me know. I will get us added to that service. But we are here to answer questions. That's what we enjoy doing. That's what we want to do. And we love hearing from people. We love having questions. Like having Jay here and just feeding me questions. That's awesome, because that gives me stuff to ramble on about with my tired ass. That's my excuse. I'm tired and I'm rambly. And that's what I'm sticking to. And we did a lot of good work in this studio, damn it. And before he drives me nuts clicking that thing open and shut over there, I'll get this sealed all up and put up. Thank you for joining us for the folks on the live stream. Once again, this will be more a regular thing, especially when he comes up. It's like a two-person thing. We'll probably live stream it some more. But yeah, before I ramble on and for another hour and 35 minutes, I will talk at you guys. Bye.
Bye, guys.